I played a pretty nice game earlier today, and although I won the game, which always feels nice, there were definitely some issues and some things that I missed while I was playing that I really need to not miss in games like this. So let's have a look. I was playing with the black pieces, and I played the Caro-Kann, which is typically what I play these days. And we ended up getting into an exchange variation. And then this is where I was actually out of prep, like pretty early. So this move, bishop f4, is pretty uncommon. It's played about 1% of the time, according to the database. But it doesn't seem to be anything particularly interesting or special. I still know all of the ideas behind the Exchange Caro-Kann. I'm going to bring out my knights. And if a knight ever ends up here, if white's knight ever ends up here, I'm going to bring out my bishop. And then I'm going to push that pawn. This bishop's going to come out somewhere. And if I ever trade off my light squared bishop, then maybe instead of bringing my dark squared bishop out to d6, perhaps I will fianchetto instead and have a whole lot of pawns on light squares. So I know all of the ideas. I don't think bishop f4 kind of messes with any of those. So let's see how it goes. Plan is going according, it's going as usual, and honestly, there's a way for white to play this so that the knight doesn't end up there and I can't actually pin it. But often at my level, people don't tend to be that prepared with the Exchange Caro-Kann. Sometimes they are, sometimes not. In any case, pretty normal moves at this point. And now here, I was pretty proud of myself for finding the top engine move here, which is queen b6. And the idea is, of course, I'm hitting that bishop. And if the bishop just simply moves away, then I'm also hitting this pawn. And, probably it's best for white to just trade here, but then they're trading off a bishop for a knight without any really clear compensation. And this is where white actually made a significant mistake in the game. They played knight a3. And knight a3 looks like it's defending that bishop, but from a distance, knight a3 doesn't work because my bishop can take the knight. Now, here is actually the first place where I miscalculated. It was totally fine, but I thought that this was just completely winning the game because I calculated that after white takes, of course, they lose their bishop. What I didn't realize, of course, is after I take the knight, white can take my knight first with a check. And then when I recapture one way or the other, then white takes here. And so it's just an equal exchange, but it actually still ends up being better for black. So I decided to take with the queen. According to the engine, it might have been a little bit better to take with the pawn. I don't entirely understand why. I guess it still maintains some pressure there, but that pawn is just going to move anyway. So I don't know. There's a nuance there, but taking with the queen is perfectly fine. And then actually I get to take this pawn as well with a check. And so through that exchange, I have won a pawn and I've damaged white's structure pretty significantly. They have doubled pawns here and they have an isolated pawn here. So things are looking really good for black. I won a second pawn, which I'm always a little bit nervous about getting too greedy with pawns like this, because sometimes there are ways that, I don't know, my queen can get chased away or a rook can come out and cause pressure. In this case, I figured with my queen on this nice long diagonal, I wasn't going to get trapped anywhere. So this was good. And then white castled. And the issue is I'm still maintaining this pin here, but also my queen is hitting this knight. So now I can capture that knight. And what I was thinking they would do is take back with the queen. I would trade queens, and this would open up their king. What actually happened is they just captured back with the pawn, which still serves to open up their king, open up the G file. So, and even further damage their pawn structure. Now they have 4 pawn islands all isolated, and this one's doubled. So it's pretty bad for white. What does the engine say? The engine says it's already minus 2.7, 2.8. So now I developed my knight. The natural place that I would normally want to develop this knight is to f6, but I didn't really know what to do about bishop g5. I didn't want there to be a potential of opening up the G file for me as well, and for, for white to get their rook over here. And then I could potentially bring my queen back to defend my knight, but then I'm just putting myself into a pin. So I just didn't like that. I instead put the knight here. I felt if white ends up with a rook on the G file, I could put my knight here to block. I could also put my knight here, which actually covers that square. And then I felt the queen could come back here, or if the knight moves, it could come back here and then get over onto the king side. And I felt like this was a better position for the knight. White grabbed the C file, I castled, and now it's clear that white wants to put that rook on the G file, which makes a lot of sense. And I have to keep an eye on this, right? Because if the rook is attacking that pawn, then the bishop could potentially come in as well. Maybe there's a way for the queen to come in later also. So I put the knight here, which defends both of these squares, helping to prevent the bishop from coming in. And the really nice thing is there are no pawns and there's no bishop that can actually kick that knight. So that felt like a really nice outpost for the knight, actually. Rook goes on the G file, as expected. I decided to sort of contest the C file a little bit. And then this is where I actually messed up. So a long time ago, my queen came over to A3. And then after castling, what I didn't see is that my queen is on this dark square diagonal with my rook, the same diagonal. So this is a tactical motif that I just missed. I just entirely didn't see it. And I think that's where I need to improve at scanning the board and seeing this kind of thing that could potentially be a threat. Because of course, white has a dark squared bishop that could go right there and fork those two pieces, especially after this move that they just made. All I saw was, instead of contesting for the C file, they wanted to attack my B pawn. And so I played B6, completely oblivious to this potential fork. Now, as it turns out, since I'm already up 2 pawns, the fork is not so bad, because in this position, I can actually just capture this pawn and lose the exchange, and now I'm still up 1 point of material instead of 2, which is not so bad. Instead, what happened is white played F4, which I'm a little bit confused as to why they did that. Perhaps it was to open up their queen here. But what I saw is, okay, now I don't need to defend against the bishop coming in. And of course, I'm still not seeing this fork. And so I played a pretty big mistake, actually. I played knight takes d4, and it makes this fork even worse because now my knight is hanging. So this is where, like, I still managed to get out of it, and I'm quite happy, and I'll show you how I did it in a minute. But this is where, like, missing this possibility was a big issue. Like, I even, at this point when I was evaluating taking with the knight, I even saw that there was going to be a discovered attack on the knight if that bishop ever moved somewhere. I just didn't actually see that the bishop could move there. So I don't know. There's something about how I see the board and how I see where things can go that I'm still missing pretty important tactical motifs like this. In any case, I took the pawn and white played bishop b4. And I'm actually pretty proud of myself here because there is one move that saves the game, and it is queen f3 check. What this does is it forces a queen trade. Technically, I think maybe white could block, but in any case, white captured the queen. I took with the knight, which also hits the rook, but it doesn't prevent me from losing the exchange because the rook can go here, and now I have to move the knight to safety. We exchange, and I still end up 1 pawn. So I still lose the exchange, but I'm still up a pawn. White's pawn structure is still pretty horrible, and life goes on. I just wish I hadn't missed that this that this was even a possibility back here. There were a few opportunities, actually even right here, where I could have just captured the a-pawn. And now, like in this case, of course, it's a trade because white can take that pawn, but at least it gets my queen off of this diagonal. After pushing here, when white pushes this, I can still actually just grab the a-pawn, and it's even better now. I'm just looking because, like, then there's this, which looks scary, but my knight is still defending there. So anyway, if I had seen this, I would have played it differently. But I didn't see it, so we played through this. And things are still okay. At this point, white doubles up the rook. That's pretty logical. I move my knight back because it defends this and also gets the knight off of the rim. And now, so here I kind of realized that I'm up material, but I'm up a knight and 3 pawns against a rook. And so really my pawns are my biggest asset. And so I'm not really comfortable playing with 1 rook against 2, even though I'm technically up material. But what I did realize is I need to make sure that white can't just start like gobbling up my pawns, because then my whole advantage is lost. The other part of my advantage, actually, again related to pawns, is the fact that white's pawn structure is so horrible. So I need to play well with my pawns. I need to not like give them up without some kind of compensation. I need to be really careful about what these rooks can do. So I played knight c7, which is a bit passive, but covers this pawn, also covers this pawn in case it comes under attack in some lines, and still holds on to this file. Now, I didn't understand this move at first, but basically white wants to double the rooks on the a file. And I wasn't quite sure what to do here, so I decided it's an endgame, let's get my king more active, so I started doing that. Now it became clear to me about white's plan to get on the a file, and I found what I thought was a pretty nice sequence here. I figured that if I could reroute my knight to this square, not only does it attack this rook, but it also defends this pawn, and if this pawn moves up here, then it defends that pawn as well. And it kind of creates a nice fortress for me, so I don't have to worry about the rooks trying to grab some of my pawns. So I guess seeing what I was up to, white moves over here, I defend that pawn, white moves over here. I defend my g-pawn with my king. I could have also pushed it, probably just 1 square, and eventually I do, actually on the next move, I think, but I felt like let's get my king a bit more active. Maybe it can come up and put pressure on that pawn. I don't know. Why did white do this move? I'm not really sure, to be honest. Maybe to give the option of doubling, but they still would have had that. I'm not really sure. That seemed like a bit of a strange move. I pushed this pawn so that it was defended and I could activate my king even further. They push there, and I finally put my knight where I wanted it in the first place. Again, nothing can kick the knight, nothing can get rid of it. And if they push that pawn trying to kind of mess up my structure, then I can always take with the knight. White pins my knight so that I can't capture on a5, but I bring my rook, and now my rook can capture on a5. I think this was sort of, maintaining the pin on the knight. So if a5 and takes, then I actually lose a pawn. That's fine because I can always just take with the rook, and white can't easily get control of this c file. So again, I just continue activating my king. Quick move to attack my a pawn, which I quickly prevent, and then defending the f pawn, the f4 pawn. Excuse me, and then the king goes up to hit the rook. And now my king is like super active. I have a pretty nice fortress, and there's not much that white can do, to be honest. What's the eval now? It's minus 4.7 at this point. So I felt like I played this endgame quite well. I knew that I needed to defend weak pawns, make sure that the rooks didn't have a way in so they couldn't get behind and start picking things up. And then I need to just start working with my pawns and trying to get up to try to get a promotion happening. So this pawn is pretty weak, and I started going after it. Now, the engine doesn't really like this. The engine thinks that I should just start pushing my D pawn, actually, and maybe that's better, but I felt like, okay, that pawn is pinned because of the rook there, so I should be able to win it. And I did. In this case, this was just a weird calculation as well. I'm not too concerned about it. Technically, it would have been better to take with the rook, because then if white trades, I was a bit worried that this rook could come here or here, but it can't because the knight is defending this square and the pawn is defending this square. So I was worried about white getting in on the B file. It turns out they would have needed a few moves in order to make that happen, like here and then here and then here. And so that's plenty of time for me to prevent that. But in any case, where were we? I took with the pawn because I felt like having my rook here meant that I could start pushing it. And I did. Now, pushing here, of course, gives white this file. So I decided now, but on the other hand, this pawn is defended by my knight. So now my rook is a little bit more free. I can't try to contest for this file yet because I'm going to lose the rook. So I decided to go here, maybe putting it on b6 eventually. White came in. That's right. The other thing that I had calculated at this point is that if white comes in, this pawn is defended, this one isn't, but I can push it and then bring my king to actually defend all of these three pawns, which seemed like a pretty nice defensive structure. And that is exactly what happened. And then now, like, white played this move, but it was basically a waiting move. Like, what can white do here, right? Like, there's not really any options. So they played that. I played here, thinking that maybe I would bring this pawn up so it's defended by the knight, and then I can move my rook and start getting in, start infiltrating with the rook. But then this was kind of the final blunder. So they moved out of the way, and I could start pushing that pawn. And there was actually a really nice piece of coordination here. They came down here, I think probably as kind of a desperado move, wanting me to move that pawn so their rook could get in. And I suppose that's checkmate, actually. If I were to take there, then that is actually checkmate. But I could take with the knight, and then when they take with the pawn, again, I think that's checkmate, isn't it? Yeah, interesting. But instead of taking with the king, instead of taking with the pawn, I could have just taken with the king. I would have lost this pawn, and then maybe there's some kind of counterplay. I don't think there's much. But instead, I could just promote. And the beauty is the queen covers that square. And so white took, I took, and white resigned. It turns out that here, after white took, there was actually a mate in 3, where the king is forced to go to h3, and then I play king here. And then white cannot stop checkmate either on g3 or on h1. But I didn't see that during the game. I just grabbed the pawn and figured I'm up a queen. I can win this. So it was a good game. Again, it feels good to win, but I just wish that I had been able to see. Can I find it here? I wish that I had seen this potential tactic, and that's something that I'm going to learn from this game. And I've learned it before, but this game is going to reinforce it. That I just need to always be on the lookout for these potential motifs, like pieces that could be pinned, pieces that could be skewered, pieces that could be forked by either a knight or a bishop, and just kind of always keep a lookout for them. I should have seen it. I mean, I'm just kind of going back here. Really, I should have seen it here even, that my queen and knight were lined up. And then especially after castling, my queen, knight, and rook are all lined up. And that's just an important thing to be able to see and to be able to say it like instantly and know that it's there and just kind of keep an eye on it when you're making your decisions through the game. So something I'm going to think about and work on and learn from. But overall, this was a good game. I learned a few things from it, and I think I played pretty well, especially in the end game when I was playing with a knight and pawns against a rook, because that's something that makes me a little bit nervous. I really like having my rooks, and I don't like playing against an opponent who has more rooks than me. But I felt pretty happy about how that part of it went. And yeah, lots to learn, and next game will be coming soon.